oppression. So they support Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they support Hamas in Gaza. And interestingly enough, Hezbollah is Shia, and Hamas is Sunni. It's not based on religion. It's based on an opposition to oppression. I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock here, so I've got to wrap this up. So the issue of Israel is a little easier to explain, I think, if you can just talk to people about it. Iran is not an anti-Semitic country. It doesn't have an anti-Semitic government. In fact, it has the largest Jewish community in the Middle East outside of Israel. Some 30,000 people, and then they've been there a lot longer than Zionism has been around. And there's 11 functioning synagogues in Tel Aviv, and kosher shops, meat shops, and a Jewish hospital, and they're building a cultural and sports center at government expense that the Jewish community asked for, but they're opposed to Israel. They're opposed to Israel. So you have to understand that Zionism doesn't represent all Jews, and opposition to Zionism doesn't mean you're opposite to Jews. And the best way that people will learn that lesson is as more and more Jewish people stand up against Zionism, which is happening. And President Ahmadinejad did not deny the Holocaust. On the quote about wiping Israel off the map, it was a mistranslation. And anybody who knows Farsi can just say that this regime, as the Imam said, this regime occupying Jerusalem will disappear from the pages of history. He wasn't calling for the physical disruption. And finally, Amy Goodman and Juan Gonzalez from the U.S. progressive television program Democracy Now! Interviewed President Ahmadinejad and asked him straight out, and he said, do you believe that the Nazis killed millions of Jews? And he says, of course. Of course. That's a fact, a historical fact. But that happened in Europe. That was Europeans killing Europeans on European soil. How does that justify taking land away from the Palestinians in the Middle East to build a Jewish state? That's what he asks. See? And when he talks about the mythology of the Holocaust, I don't believe he's saying that the Holocaust is a myth. He's saying that what happened to 6 million Jews has been raised to the level of a myth in order to justify the establishment of Israel. And the fact that there were many millions more who were killed by the Nazis, Roma people, trade unionists, homosexuals, communists, any people with mental disabilities, some say as many as 5 million more. Why are they not mentioned as part of the Holocaust? You know, we should be as outraged about one person being murdered and the target of genocide as anyone else. And that is what I think Iran stands for. It's against the oppression of any people, including the Palestinians. That's some of the answers to the media myths. There's a new one that pops up every day, and for a while I was trying to stay on top of, every report that was coming out of Iran about this person being arrested and mistreated for simply, demanding their rights. And most of the time when I was able to look into it, there was some problems with the story. When I was in Iran in last August, the situation of the 3 U.S. hikers was very on the front burner. And I was getting emails from friends at home in the peace movement saying, Phil, can you try to get the hikers released? Yeah, sure, I'll make a couple of calls, But as it turns out, I met somebody who met somebody who met somebody, and I got introduced to some very interesting people, one of them who is very close to the president. And on the last day before I was going home, I said, I've been getting these emails and so on. I wish I had maybe been able to visit the hikers in the prison, in even prison, so I could tell what the situation was. And she said, why didn't you ask me before? Happened to be the widow of Dr. Fatemi, who was the foreign minister under Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, who was overthrown by the CIA. And Dr. Fatemi is one of the most well-respected individuals in all of Iran. When she's in Iran, she stays at the Hotel Layla, which is on Dr. Fatemi Street. And she pulled a few strings, and she came back, that night, and she said, if you want to go to even prison, you can visit the young woman, Sarah Sloan, Short, who was the person who they were saying was suffering from cancer, and that was most of the attention. So I thought about it, and I said, if I do that, they're going to say, hey, this guy who's sympathetic to the Iranian government says everything's fine. That's not going to carry much weight. But how about if I come home and talk to her mother? Could I get a visa to bring her mother back so we could go visit Sarah together? And they said yes. I got permission to do that. So I came home, and we reached it through Friends in the Peace Movement. We reached Sarah Sloan, the mother, and she was ecstatic. And she said, I just got to run it by the other mothers because we try to do everything together, but let's do it, make sure like 10 days to a week, we'll go back. Next day I get an email saying that she had discussed it with the other mothers, and they decided this would not be a good idea, that it would just be a propaganda coup for the Iranian government and might make it more difficult to get the kids out. Well, I know what happened. She talked to the State Department. She'd already met twice with Hillary Clinton, and it was a lot better to have a white woman supposedly suffering from cancer, suffering in even prison, than it would be to bring her home. When she did come home, she got a physical examination at Qatar, and there was nothing wrong with her. She was in fine physical shape. I'm not saying the case was handled correctly in Iran. All I'm saying is that if an American stubs their toe in Tehran, it's going to be an international incident. And we should be very, very cautious about how we view these things. There's lots more I'd love to say. It's time for me to get off the stage. I hate it particularly when white guys talk so long. And I'm up here with a representative of the Cuban government and one of the most well-known heroes of the U.S. progressive movement, Cynthia Kinney. So I think the better part of modesty is to sit down. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. One question that was asked was about the rise of the right in the West, and at a time when people throughout the Middle East are coming out on the streets demanding justice and a progressive government, and people in Latin America are adopting socialism instead of colonialism. What is going on in the U.S. and the United Kingdom and some other countries? And in Richmond, I live in the state of Virginia, which has a reputation as being a conservative state, although it voted for Barack Obama in the last election. It's the first time they elected a Democrat since Lyndon Johnson. And I'm not using President Obama as a litmus test for progressive votes, but they voted for him rather than John McCain. So that was interesting. And even today, the polls say that if President Obama were to run today, he would carry Virginia again by a very small margin. Now, that's not the impression you get in Virginia, because Virginia has one of the largest Tea Party movements in the country. They had a statewide convention last October in Richmond, and they claimed that 2,800 people came. And that was 3 or 4 times the largest any number of people that turned out for a statewide convention. So I attended the convention. I'd previously gone to a Tea Party rally because I want, if we're going to face fascism, I want to know about it early on. Because there's steps you have to take to defend yourself and your movement. And they had pulled out 3,000 people in a rally about a year ago in Richmond. And I noticed that while the speakers were talking about immigration and about the Constitution and about all of these, their standard, there were signs demanding jobs and into foreclosures. This is a white movement. People have described it as a white nationalist movement. It's a movement of the white middle class that is frightened that it's lost its position which it never questioned before. It never questioned before. I just bought a GPS. I usually use the Google Maps, and I ran out the route from Richmond, Virginia to Richmond Hill, and it was 4 pages. Every 10 miles you have to turn. So I finally said, I can't do this anymore. I travel a lot, and I have a terrible sense of direction. So I bought a GPS. So for the GPS, you have several choices of voices that you can use. And there are 3 white women, there is 1 white man, and then if you want to go to French, there's a French woman and a French man who are, ethnically French. And then there's, if you want to go to Spanish, there's a woman and a man who, I used to know a little Spanish, and it's more Castilian, in other words, from Europe rather than Latin America. So in other words, when you move to a new level of technology, all of the talk about a new, diverse society and racial tolerance and, a post-racial society goes out the window. The default is white. When they opened clip art, remember clip art, for those of you who are older, and you could download images from computers, and everyone was white except Martin Luther King. They always had Martin Luther King, but everybody else was white. And when they started, moving away from real operators and getting someone, you pick up a phone and it says, "Thank you for calling our company, and their call is very important to us." It's always a white person. Well, that was the mindset. And now, in 40 years, white people will be a minority in the United States. They're already a minority in California and Texas. And it's very, very unsettling to a lot of white folks. Now, a lot of white folks voted for Barack Obama, which is interesting, because to vote for, the most valuable player in the NFL is one thing. But to vote for the guy who's going to sit in the White House, control over your life, you have to think he's intelligent. And for white people to think that a black person is more intelligent than they are is a fundamental undermining of white supremacy. It's very important. It's a very important cultural change. So what we have in the country is one group of white people who are willing to say, I'd like to put a black man in the White House. And another group of white people who said, holy moly, that's the end of the world. So we have a division, a split. I don't think it's that the right wing represents the majority of people. I think when you look at who, as Cynthia McKinney pointed out, who's funding, she asked who's funding the progressives, who's funding the right wing. See, it's the corporations. It's the corporations that fund foundations that then give money to nonprofits, which then give money to the Tea Party. Even so, they pulled out a rally to influence the General Assembly in Richmond a couple of weeks ago. It was only 200 people. We pulled out one that had 110 people. You can count when there's only 110. So they only pulled out twice as many as we did, and with all the resources they have behind them. So I think we have to worry about the right wing, particularly because of a fear of economic ruin of the white middle class, coupled with scapegoating immigrants and people of color, coupled with a militaristic tendency towards violence, are the 3 ingredients that will give you a genuine fascist movement. And I don't think that's a word we should throw around easily, because you have to fight fascism with violence. You can't fight fascism with nonviolence. We're not there yet in the United States, in the country as a whole. Certain sections, we're pretty close. But we're much closer to a police state than we are to a fascist state. So I don't think we should feel that the U.S. has just gone to the right and that it's hopeless. It's split down the middle. That's the problem. And what we need is a credible alternative, not only among the people of color who are more open to a progressive agenda, and on the domestic issues and the international issues, but we need a movement that also says to the white workers, the Tea Party can't open up a single factory that's shut down. They can't give you a single job. They can't make sure your kids go to college. All they can find is someone to blame it on. Join with us. Join with your sisters and brothers in the Black, Latino, Asian, Native American, Middle Eastern communities. Defend the Islamic community. Demand the U.S. get out of the 160 countries where it has troops. Come over to a progressive agenda. That's the only way that you can improve your life and feel good about yourself in a real sense.